Hi guys, today we're going to talk about databases. This is the sixth part in our Intro to PySimpleGUI series, and we're going to talk about how we can take data from a PySimpleGUI user interface, a form, we can submit it into a database, and we can retrieve that data and display it in a table. So just to give you an example of what that's going to look like, we have sort of a basic application right here. This one doesn't include databases. But what this does right now is we can enter a name, we can enter some contact information. So we have John 22 Mayberry and a made up phone number. We can submit that information, and then we can see that in a table right here. Okay. Now, in order for you to understand what's going on, you'll need to watch some of the previous videos, including our Intro to Databases with Python, and the video on validation, because we're making heavy use of validation right here. We actually have a file called validation with a few functions, and we are using that to make sure that the user is entering in all of these values each time. The validation isn't so important for this video. What is important is when the user clicks submit contact information, we're going to this block on the if statement. And yeah, we're validating, but ultimately, if what we've entered here is valid, then we are submitting that we're creating an array we're creating an array of the values that have been submitted, and then we're submitting that into another array called the contact information array. And this is a 2D array, and eventually, when we click on show table to show our table right here, we'll take that 2D array, submit it to this function as a parameter. And we will use that to generate this table. We'll also include headings, which is included up here as well. So right now, this works, but the problem is that we're storing all of our information in an array. So as soon as we close this program, we're going to lose our information. And that's where a database comes in. So we're going to work with SQLite 3 today. Which allows us to store information in a document that acts as a database. So we can send queries to this document, to this database. We can get data back, and it basically allows us to be able to see data after closing and reopening a program. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we want to do is we want to create a database. And again, if you haven't seen the intro to SQLite 3 video, then you should definitely take a look at that, because we've kind of gone over what that looks like. Anyways, let's go ahead and create a database, or let's go ahead and create a file that will allow us to create a database. Let's just close this up. I don't need that for right now. Okay, cool. So let's create a file called, let's say, create database.py. All right. So in this create database, we're going to have import SQLite 3. One of the great things about using SQLite as our method of storing data in a database is that it's very closely integrated with Python. So we already have a library here we can easily access without installing any other external library. We're going to do con equals SQLite 3 dot connect, and then we're going to type in the name of our desired database, contact information.db. So in the previous tutorial, I actually just created the file contact_information.db. I'm not going to do that this time, because actually it turns out when we run this line of code, if this database doesn't exist, then it creates it for us. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to write a query, and we're going to create a table to hold our contact information. So we're going to do this. This just allows us to write our query on multiple lines, and we're going to do create table, table called contact information. And we're going to need some parentheses in here. We'll have name. Well, our first field in this table is going to be name text, not null. So the user is going to be forced well, I mean, basically what this means is that whenever someone submits a record, there has to be a name, otherwise it's going to throw an error. Then address char50 for an address with 50 characters, and this one's going to be not null as well. And then phone number, int. So phone number is going to be an integer. I suppose we should probably actually make this a text because we could have hyphens and such. So let's go ahead and do that. And okay. Okay, I think that we're good to go there. So this should allow us to just create a table. And what we can do now is we need to add the line of code that allows us to execute this query. So we'll do con.execute query, which is what we had up here. And then we'll go ahead and close our connection. Con.close. All right, so let's go ahead and run this just to create our database. We'll say Python, and we're doing that right here actually. Python create database.py, and sounds like we're good to go. This is our database. We can most of this is not really going to be readable, but we can kind of see that our table was successfully created in this database. So now that we've done that, what we want to do is we want to create some functions in order for our main contact window and our table to access the database. So first what we want to do is we want to allow right here where we're submitting the information to an array. Instead of doing that, we want to submit our information to the database. All right. So instead of creating this array right here and appending it to another array to create a 2D array and then using that to populate our table, we just want to submit our information to a database. And the second thing we want to do is instead of our table right here, using that array, getting an array as a parameter to the create function, and then using that to generate the table. So by the table, I mean this one right here. We don't even want this window to be getting any input from the main contact window file. What we want to happen is whenever we decide to open up that window, we want this information that goes to the table to come directly from the database. So in this file, we're going to read from the database. In this file, we're going to submit to a database. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to create a function called, a file called database-interface.py. So normally an interface has a different connotation related to object-oriented programming, but we're not really working with that in this case. And just to create a name that would be easy to communicate to pretty much everyone who's watching this video, we're going to call it database interface, which basically means that this file is going to be the interface between our Python code and the database. So let's go ahead and write that code. So we really want two functions right here. We need to import SQLite 3 first. And then what we want to do is we want to create a function called def insert contact that takes in the parameters name, address, and phone number. And then what we want to do is we want to create a function called, we want to create another function to retrieve all the database data. So we'll say def retrieve contacts. So basically for this function, again, this is kind of taken from the video, the intro to SQLite 3 video. We're just going to go ahead and we're going to connect to the SQLite database. which we really need to do pretty much every time we're running a query in this case. So SQLite 3.connect, and then we're connecting to contact information.db, and then con.execute. We're going to have insert into to add something, contact information. So contact information is the name of our table, and then we've got three things we want to insert. We've got three fields to insert for: name, address, and phone number. Okay. Okay. Just put that on hold for a while. Okay, so we've got this right here. What we're going to do is we're going to use that to start writing our code into another line, just to make it easy to read. We've got values, and then we've got 3 question marks for each parameter we're going to get from Python. What we want to do here is we want to add our Python inputs to match up to these question marks. So this one's matching up to this, this, and this. And then those are going to match up to each of these fields. So there we go. Okay. So just shouldn't make a difference, but okay, so right here, that's our query to insert our 3 parameters into our SQLite database. So now we've done that, we're going to do con.commit because we're making a change to the database, and then con.close. Retrieve contacts is going to be our next function, and right here we're just going to get some information, and we're going to store it in the form of a 2D array so that we can go ahead and we can directly submit this to our table. Because remember right here, in order to show information in a table, this needs to be a 2-dimensional array. So we're going to get our data from the database, turn that into a 2D array, and then once we're done with that, we're going to hook this function into our table. So it's not really any inputs here. We just want to get everything in the database, create an array called results. Again, we're going to connect to the database. And you should have seen this cursor notation from our previous video. We're going to con.execute. And then we're just getting some data, so we're going to have a select statement. Select name, address, phone number from contact information, from the contact information table. And once we've done that, we should get our output in the form of an array of tuples. So for row in cursor, our information would come in the form of just row, and that would be generally all the information in a data structure called a tuple, which isn't an array or a list. A list in Python, I've been just using the term arrays. They're really lists in Python. They're not arrays like you'd find in other C-based languages like Java or C++. But basically, in order to create our 2D array or 2D list, we need to get this tuple, which is row. We need to convert it to a list, and we need to append it to results. So we're going to have results.append, and then list row. And what this is doing is this is taking a tuple. This is turning it into an array or a list as it really is in Python. And then it's appending it to this array called results, or this list called results. The result is we get a 2D data structure that we can easily just put in here. All right. So we should be good to go. We just need to return results. And so now what we need to do is we need to modify our main contact window file to allow us to submit to a database. So let's go ahead and import database interface. And now let's think about what we're going to do here with this particular file. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of, we're still going to validate because we still want to make sure that the user's entering in data that we want. But what we're going to do instead is we're just going to say database interface dot insert contact. So remember, this is coming from this file right here, insert contact. And then we're going to put in our values for the name, for the address, and for the phone number. All right. So we're going to do that. And that actually makes it quite a bit simpler. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to modify our contact information table window to get information directly from our database. So let's take a look at how we can do that. The first thing that we want to do is we're just going to create a function to get all of those database records. So we're going to say import database interface, and then we're going to write a function called get contact records. And in that function, we're going to call, or actually, I mean, even rather than getting this function, we don't exactly need this. What we could do is we could just say contact records equals database interface dot retrieve contacts. All right. And then we also want to still keep our headings. So what we want to do is from here, what we did before is we clicked on show table. We had this event. We called contact information table window dot create, which is what we're working with right here. And we had two parameters, the contact information array and headings. So what we want now is for there to not be any parameters at all. Okay. So instead, we're going to take our headings from up here. Well, first of all, we can just get rid of this array because we're not using this at all. And then we can take this headings array, take this from here, and we can put this right in here. All right. So this way, we have two things. We've got our contact. We basically got our 2D array with all of our contact records, contact information. So we can do contact records array, or sorry, contact records, which we have right up here. And then we've already got headings, and we can get rid of these parameters, which we don't need anymore. And we should be good to go right here. As you know, it's not always the case, but let's hope that it is. So what we want to do first is we want to go ahead and we want to run this, enter in some information. So myth, we can enter in something like this, enter address, let's just say 22 Mayberry. And of course, we haven't really done amazing validation. That hasn't really been the focus here, but ideally we should do some better validation. And submit it. I guess it works. Let's go check our database to make sure that we've got that value in there, because it'll give us some clues as to whether it does or not. Go all the way to the end, and it looks like it did work. That is the kind of the information that we submitted. So I guess that did work. So that side works. And now the real test is let's open the window and let's see whether that worked. And yeah, perfect. So it looks like we're just showing the information from this database in the table. So what that was is that was just a really simple example of how to use databases in a PySimpleGUI application. Of course, this is really simple. We're just inserting and retrieving information. I mean, in the future, I mean, what you could do is you could create functions to delete information from the table, to find information, delete it from another window, to use specific criteria to find information. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do, but this is just a way to get started with the most basic capabilities that a database offers you when working with Python and PySimpleGUI applications. I hope that was useful. See you next time.